welcome to a brand new episode of Coming Distractions brought to you by the Nerdpocalypse podcast. I'm your host, Jay. I'm solo this week, ironically, to review Solo, a Star Wars story. This is the latest in the new Star Wars movies, this time focusing on the origin story of Han Solo, obviously originally played by Harrison Ford. This time, the younger version of him is played by Alden Ehrenreich. Also, the film co-stars Woody Harrelson as Tobias Beckett, Emilia Clarke as Qi'ra, Donald Glover, of course, as Lando Calrissian, and Paul Bettany as Dryden Voss, sort of the villain of the film. So the movie is done in a space western style, which I guess isn't really all that surprising considering the main character. And it sort of deals with Han, his very first adventure. He's this young kid on his planet, and he decides, like, look, he's got this girlfriend, Qi'ra, played by Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones, who both of them want to get off planet and go live their lives, right? They feel trapped for obvious reasons. They want to get away from the Empire is on their planet as well. So they kind of want to go, and Han wants to be this great pilot, right? Basic story. They eventually, make their way, or Han makes his way off planet through a series of like fun sort of mini adventures in the beginning, and we're off to the races. What I liked about this film, there's a lot to like, and there are a couple little sort of issues here. A lot of people were really concerned of how this film was going to turn out after the production issues, where Phil Lord and Christopher Miller left, and they were replaced by Ron Howard, sort of probably in the first quarter of the film being worked on, and everyone was like, oh my God, it's in peril. This is going to be the end of everything Star Wars as far as this movie goes. Turns out, really wasn't a problem. There are a couple of little moments that you can tell, like maybe this is where the sort of transition happened. But it's not, I wouldn't argue that it's super obvious. Like, wow, okay, it's not like Justice League where you could tell, like, this is clearly big cuts in the movie. This more plays like that part didn't quite work right. And then you can literally watch the film, and certain moments of the film or certain characters in the film just get better. And I'll talk about that under a different director, I think is the big point there. But what I liked about the film is, it's supposed to be the more underbelly, seedier part of the Star Wars universe. There are no Jedis in this, that sort of thing. So it feels dirtier. It feels a little bit more gritty and things like that, but not in like a gritty reboot kind of way, but just the dirtier part of the universe, right? Where you would think, if you're a big Star Wars fan, which I am, like what you would think of like Coruscant and stuff like that, like the underground and a lot of like thieves and scoundrels and that sort of thing. So it feels like that. Like there was that Star Wars 1313 game that was supposed to come out where it was supposed to be the grittier side of the universe. It feels more like that, right? For obvious reasons, because you're dealing with scoundrels and thieves, right? It totally makes sense. What I liked about that is that while it felt very different than the sort of clean, higher crust parts of the Star Wars universe, it felt like Star Wars. It still felt that way. It didn't feel wildly different. It felt like more of those sort of grounded moments you saw in Rogue One, where like Darth Vader wasn't there, right? Like it didn't feel like a big space battle sort of thing. There's another big part of this where the film, its goal is to show you this historical character that you've known, and you know everything about Han up into this moment, right? From A New Hope forward. But all of those things, while they are canon and these are the way in which you know the character, the movie has to work hard to tie it to those things without it being obnoxious, right? You don't want him to be like repeating all the famous lines that you know from the original trilogy, where you're just like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, I know, don't get cocky, kid, I get it. You don't want that to happen. And I actually think the movie did a really good job of avoiding that. They gave you a couple of those moments or where you see where those things come from later on. You go, okay, that's a kind of a cool connection. And like, if you're a big Star Wars fan, that works for you, but without it being every line he says, or like someone's like, oh, they say a line to him and then he says it 30 years later. It's not like that, which it easily could have been that. And they do a good job of avoiding that, but also tying it to the larger Star Wars lore, which is actually kind of cool. And it ties it in ways that I wasn't expecting, which was kind of nice. as a person who reads about all this stuff all the time, it's kind of cool to be surprised by a lot of these things. I thought the character portrayals were really good. A lot of people had heard, people who are into this stuff as much as I am, that Alden Ehrenreich was having some acting issues, and they brought in an acting coach. Apparently that's true, or at least it was a pretty heavily thrown around rumor at one point. Look, in the beginning of the movie, I can totally understand why people would be like, is this guy a good Han? Like, I don't know. Because it's a little shaky in the beginning. I will admit that. Where I think that was probably a lot of the stuff under Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, honestly. And that's not to slam those guys at all. But he didn't quite have it. But it's about, I wouldn't even say half, maybe like 15 to 20 minutes into the movie, things just sort of click. And it literally looks like he started studying Harrison Ford's mannerisms and like just like little things and like just like physical tics and things like that. And there's a couple of moments where you're like, damn, like he really kind of nailed it. So I would give it, if you're watching the movie and it feels a little shaky in the beginning, know that it gets better. It gets profoundly better. And maybe that was the acting coach he had. I don't know. But it seemed to kind of shake itself out a little bit. And on that same note, the film, like there's some early action sequences that felt a little flat to me, that didn't quite have like the impact a normal big action sequence would have. And I just kind of found myself going, well, that was really cool. But like, it didn't have like, wow, that was like, the music or just the action beat itself didn't have like real weight to it, like I was expecting it to have, like I've seen in other Star Wars movies. I'm not comparing it to other franchises, just literally Star Wars. And I would argue that was probably maybe the first two action sequences, but after that, again, there is a noticeable difference, an uptick in how things start to play out. And you start to get more of these impactful scenes, and like it just really super starts to work. So I think everybody was kind of on shaky ground. I mean, a lot of the talk was that under Lord and Miller, there was a lot of improvisation. And I think maybe that kind of threw people off a little bit, because there's some dialogue that just didn't feel like it was delivered as well as I thought like Woody Harrelson and Emilia Clarke could have done. I'm not really all that familiar with Alden Ehrenreich's work, so like I don't have much to compare it to. But certainly Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones and Woody Harrelson, who is a fantastic actor, their stuff didn't feel like them. Like it felt like they were like trying to make something work. But later in the film, again, like after maybe 20 or 30 minutes, like it just picks up considerably. So it's kind of an interesting film when you think about the background production stuff. But again, it's not like a hard line where like, wow, okay, this is where it's changed. But just over time, it just slowly just hits a ramp, and then it goes to where you think it will, and it actually does very well. Luckily for him, Donald Glover comes in after everything is solved and absolutely crushes it as Lando Calrissian. Look, he was the big breakout that everybody was super excited to see his performance. And I can assure you, he is fantastic as Lando. He nails that character so well that he goes beyond just doing an impression of Billy D. Williams, but he puts his own spin on it. But it just works. Like it really does work without it being a new interpretation of the character, if that makes sense. He's eccentric and like flamboyant in a way that makes perfect sense for that character. And like they have like moments about like his capes and like, like he's an over the top character, exactly what you expected from the little bit we saw of him in the original trilogy. So yeah, he was great. He was dope. I mean, there's talk that he's getting his own movie. Yeah, I could see that. I don't know that it's necessary, but I would totally watch it without a doubt. He was fantastic. We get to see Chewie. Obviously, he's a large part of this movie, and he's great. Like he's really great. The interaction between him and Han is excellent. Their friendship from the time that they meet, which is actually a really cool meeting, to the end of the film, their relationship progresses in a way that I thought made sense. And it's nice. And you can see why they become such close friends through the entire arc of their lives, right? Other things, Qi'ra, played by Emilia Clarke, is the love interest for Han in this movie. And it's a well done love interest because she's never seen as like this weak damsel in distress kind of character. She's very much can hold her own, and she's complicated in a lot of ways, which is really good. Look, I loved Paul Bettany as what's his name, Dryden Voss as the villain. He's sort of this gangster kind of bad guy who is working for somebody in the Empire, and he's basically like a mid boss, if you will. And he's got these like cool scars on his face that just makeup wise look really neat. But he's kind of the guy financing these adventures from Woody Harrelson's team with Han on it. So he's cool, and he plays it very smooth and very cool, but also with like a twinge of like a little bit of crazy, which is good for Bettany, who's a great actor. The things I didn't like don't outweigh the things that I did like. Again, I would argue maybe at the 20 to 30 minute mark, things start to kind of shake out, and Ron Howard clearly had taken over and set the movie on a good path. Look, I'd see another Han Solo focused trilogy, or excuse me, movie. I know that Alden Ehrenreich is contracted for 2 more movies. I don't know if that just means he'll be in like the Lando movie and something else. That Boba Fett movie that may or may not happen. I don't know. But I'd see him in another adventure. I thought he was good. Again, it works for the most part. It's got a couple of little issues, but I think that's mostly because of the production issues. I think if you start this movie out fresh with Ron Howard leading it from beginning to end, I think you get a better movie. So for me, it's somewhere between a 3.5 and a 4 out of 5, but I normally give in 0.5 increments. In this case, I'd probably give it a 3.8. So 3.8 out of 5. It's a good time. It's fun. It's Star Wars. Everyone is really good in it. If you're a huge Star Wars fan, you're not going to be disappointed. The vehicles and the train scene and all that other stuff, it looks dope, man. It looks super cool. Again, big standout characters. Donald Glover as Lando Calrissian was awesome. Dryden Voss, played by Paul Bettany, was great. Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo was awesome. And there's just a couple of moments where you can't help as a Star Wars fan not to smile, because you go, okay, that's where that came from. Okay, that's why that looks the way it does now. Okay, like you get to see like the Millennium Falcon as it first was versus how we know it now. Like those little things matter. You get to see moments like the Kessel Run, right? Which is a very famous thing in Star Wars lore. And like, how did they do this Kessel Run, faster than anyone else and everything else? But you get to see that. And those kind of things are always in our minds of like what that would look like when we saw it, finally, if we ever saw it. I can say that as a Star Wars fan, I was very satisfied with how they pulled that off and how they pulled off a number of things like that. So, and one of the big things before I go is the film does such a good job of leaving Han in a place at the end of the film that is connected to the universe. I was very happy with. I was like, okay, that's kind of dope, without being ridiculous or being just a silly connection to the universe. His overall connection to the universe is important, but it also is very much him. And again, I'm not going to spoil anything or anything like that, but there is a moment in this movie that to me proves how well Lawrence Kasdan gets that character, because he gives him something back that is important to that character. Like, you need that to be there, and they give it to him, and it's actually a great moment. So check out a Solo, a Star Wars story. Again, 3.8 out of 5. It's a fun time, not perfect, mostly just because of the production issues. I think, again, if Howard had done it from beginning to end, it would have been great. It would have been perfectly fine. But just a few little issues, not that bad. Good story. Han really you get to see him as a character. You really get to see his motivation and why he matters. So check it out, and we'll see you guys next time. You're watching the Nerdpocalypse YouTube channel. Make sure you click that button to subscribe, and check out our weekly podcast where we talk about movie, TV, news, tech, and weird stories from around the internet.